I remember looking into her eyes, thinking, what have these eyes seen? What has this woman experienced? And thinking she's one of the strongest, most influential women in my life.
We just heard from an American woman whose life was forever changed by Irena Sendler, a courageous rescuer during the Holocaust. Good afternoon. I'm museum historian Edna Friedberg, and today we'll get to know Irena and what she did to save lives in German-occupied Poland during the Holocaust. It's a pleasure to welcome my colleague and friend, museum historian Ewa Wampuszyc, who will help us understand the dangers and obstacles that Irena faced to assist Jews during World War II and to help rescue innocent Jewish children who were imprisoned in the Warsaw Ghetto. Thank you for joining us today, Ewa.
Thanks, Edna, for having me today.
We're so glad that you're here. And viewers, please send your questions to Ewa and we'll answer as many as possible during the course of the program. So tell us a little bit about Irena Sendler, who she was before World War II.
So Irena, like most people in Poland, came from a Catholic background, but she grew up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in a town outside of Warsaw and had many Jewish friends, not only growing up, but also later in life. Her father, whose name was Stanisław Krzyżanowski, was a doctor, and he treated poor Jewish and peasant families, often free of charge. He taught Irena a very important lesson in her life. The lesson was that if you see a person drowning, you should give them a hand. And this was a lesson that Irena embraced throughout her entire life, in fact. For example, in the 1930s, she actively protested against the segregation of Jewish students at Warsaw University. And then after, she became a social worker in Warsaw. She specifically helped poor pregnant women and single mothers. She counseled them. And in this role, she met a lot of people and she built a very strong professional and personal network. She worked tirelessly across lines of class, religion, and ethnicity.
So really a woman who dedicated herself to supporting people who were on the margins of society, neglected or even persecuted. But of course, life changed dramatically, literally overnight in Poland after Germany invaded on September 1st, 1939, sparking World War II. Yet Irena stayed consistent and continued to care for impoverished people in Warsaw. Give us a sense of what she did to take care of Polish Jews who were in immediate danger.
So soon after Germany occupied Poland, German authorities rationed the food supplies, and they further reduced these food rations as well as suspended all public social services for Jews. What Irena did was she registered Jewish families under non-Jewish names so that they could continue to receive support and assistance. She also provided these people with medical care and food by tapping into her networks of doctors or soup kitchens or other groups with whom she worked.
This was not just kindness, it was also extremely dangerous for her personally because Irena was defying German edicts against helping Jews. And the stakes in this ramped up a year later after the Jews in Warsaw were forced to live in an area called the Warsaw Ghetto. Irena again leveraged her connections, the networks, the relationships that you mentioned earlier. But please tell us what conditions were like in this urban prison zone of the ghetto.
So in October of 1940, German officials forced Jews in and around Warsaw to move into a very small area of the city of Warsaw, and they called this the Warsaw Ghetto. A month later, they sealed this ghetto, effectively locking everyone inside. They had guards monitoring the entrances and exits, and it was really very difficult to leave the ghetto, let alone escape the situation. The Germans erected a 10-foot tall wall with barbed wire. At its peak, there were about 450,000 people crowded into the ghetto, with multiple families living in single apartments. The ghetto was filthy, it was miserable, and it was dangerous. Between 1940 and July of 1942, Over 90,000 people died there from starvation, disease, and violence. German guards would humiliate, beat, and torture ghetto residents really indiscriminately. And they did this to these people just because they were Jewish.
So a really hellish, brutal landscape. And that is where Irena is now going to be working. I'm going to pause for a moment, though, to welcome viewers who are joining us, in fact, from Warsaw, Poland, also Nova Scotia, Canada, and from Guatemala, and also our viewers here in the U.S. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are, to you in Orange County, California, Lebanon, Tennessee, the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and other cities around the country. We are so glad that you are with us. So, Eva, the Germans established ghettos in Warsaw and other places to isolate Jewish people from the rest of the population. And in many ghettos, guards forced Jews of all ages inside, but also were preventing other people from entering. Yet Irena found a way around this, a way to get to the people who were in such desperate straits. How was she able to come and go with regularity from the ghetto in Warsaw?
So, German authorities were afraid of being exposed to deadly diseases like typhus and tuberculosis. These were diseases that were actually caused by the ghettos that they themselves had created. What the German authorities did is they issued passes to Polish city employees and other workers to monitor the health conditions in the Warsaw Ghetto. Irena obtained this pass for herself and for a friend through her work, through the welfare office where she worked as a social worker.
And what was the purpose of that? Once she was in the ghetto, what did Irena do?
So Irena's purpose specifically was to continue secretly delivering assistance and aid, food, medicine, clothing, even money to the Jewish residents. But this was all under the guise of helping control and monitor these epidemics. And what Irena did over time was enlist not only the help of trustworthy colleagues, but also extended her network to include tramway drivers, electricians, plumbers, or other people who had passes to enter and exit the ghetto. In the ghetto, she connected with Jewish welfare activists who helped identify children and families in need. She used this vast network to smuggle children out and secure hiding places for them in orphanages or with foster families. And in some cases, Irena herself would pick up a child personally. And she recalled on several occasions really the traumatic parting between parent and child that she witnessed firsthand.
I'm really struck as you're talking about the relationships that she called on, the creativity, the ingenuity, that Irena was incredibly savvy. She's what my family would have called an operator. She's someone who, before the war, had mastered Polish bureaucracy and knew how to work it in order to help people she knew. And afterwards, she quickly learned how to navigate the new German bureaucracy. In particular, we're hearing from people online that Irena exemplifies the amazing work of social workers and how important they are, how critical they are. A viewer named Tatum is letting us know that she actually learned about Irena Sendler when she was going to school to be a social worker. So what an incredible model for the power and impact of this profession. But to remind ourselves of this context, let's not forget that Irena was risking her life, again, doing this work. Anyone caught aiding Jews in German-occupied Poland could face severe punishment, even death. Let's listen to Irena actually in her own voice, decades later, reflecting on the dangers that she and those who she helped were facing.
Z drugiej strony, kiedy myśmy chodzili do getta z koleżanką zabierać te dzieci, to działy się dantejskie sceny, bo te rodziny jednak matka chciała, a tatuś nie chciał. Babcia chciała oddać dziecko, mamusia nie chciała. Pytano mnie, jaka jest gwarancja, jaką ja mogłam dać gwarancji. Ja nie mogłam dać nawet gwarancji, że ja przeprowadzę przez Wachę. Więc ja, idąc do rodziny żydowskiej po dziecko, nie mogłam dać żadnych gwarancji, że to dziecko będzie żyło, prawda?
So wrenching listening to her And of course, understandable that within families, the adults who were responsible for a kid might not agree, that the mother and father may have different ideas about whether to keep the kid with them and the grandparents. So painful. Germans tightened access to the ghetto, though, further in 1942, and even with the type of pass, it became more unpredictable to enter and exit. But Eva, this didn't stop Irena, did it? How did she continue to do her rescue and help?
No, she was determined. She continued to use her knowledge of the welfare system and her access to city resources, whatever was available at that time, to continue her secret activities. On occasion, she would falsely identify a home in the ghetto as being infected with typhus, for example. And the fear of contamination would keep German authorities at bay, at least long enough for her to provide aid or to identify a hiding place for a family. And members of the underground network with whom she was working, at this point, they're literally going below ground, using the sewer system of the city to get in and out of the ghetto. The sewers had been used prior to 1942 to smuggle in food and other goods into the ghetto for its residents. But in 1942, it becomes a way of moving people.
It's really hard to imagine wading through dirty sewers, but that shows the level of desperation that people had. And I've heard of parents in the Warsaw Ghetto who were in such a panic to get their kids out of there that they would wrap their children up and even try to squeeze them through openings in the ghetto wall, or in a total act of blind faith, even throw them over this 10-foot high wall, hoping that someone on the other side would find and save the kid. It's just unbearable. But I want us to bring this down to the personal and get to know one family who entrusted their tiny baby to Irena. Tell us how Irena helped to smuggle little Elżbieta Kopel out of the Warsaw Ghetto in that terrible year of 1942.
So Elżbieta, as you said, was born in the ghetto. She was born to Henia Rochman and Josel Kopel. When she was about 5 or 6 months old, members of Irena's network lightly sedated the baby to keep her from crying and placed her in a wooden box with air holes in it. Her parents, maybe as a parting gesture, put a spoon in the box. They engraved the spoon with the baby's name on one side and her birth date on the other. Then the box was placed amongst bricks in the back of a truck, and Elżbieta was driven out of the ghetto through a checkpoint to the other side. The baby was brought to a midwife. This midwife's name was Stanisława Busold, and she was a member of Irena's circle. And she helped secretly pregnant Jewish women give birth in the ghetto or in hiding. And she was engaged in saving Jewish lives in Warsaw as well. Many years later, Elżbieta learned that soon after she was smuggled out of the ghetto, her mother would call on a landline to just hear her child's voice several times, as many times, I suspect, as she could.
And calling on the phone, this is to a baby who can't even talk. So this woman, this mom, just wants to hear a sign that her baby's alive. Any, cooing or crying or breathing must have been so reassuring, but also painful. When you're talking about Elżbieta as an infant being drugged so that she would be quiet in this box, it's not an uncommon thing. I'm sure you've heard about it. I have, of babies
Absolutely.
or young children being sedated to keep them quiet to avoid detection. This story and the kind of heightened emotions in it are resonating with viewers. A woman named Patricia writes, "What unselfish parents to give up their baby so she might live." What happened to these unselfish parents? What happened to Elżbieta's parents? Were they ever reunited with their tiny girl?
No, they were not. They never saw one another again, in fact. And when Elżbieta was smuggled out of the ghetto at a very key moment of the history. It was shortly before most of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were rounded up for deportation. Over just a few months in 1942, the Germans took about 265,000 people from the Warsaw Ghetto to the Treblinka killing center. Her father was one of the people rounded up for deportation, and when he refused to board the train to Treblinka, he was shot. He was murdered on the spot. Her mother was deported later, and she ended up at the Poniatowa labor camp in occupied Poland. But she was also unfortunately shot and murdered. From what we know, this was probably in 1943.
And Elżbieta, of course, she was so young, she had no memory of her parents because she was just a baby. What happened to her as a little girl during the war and later?
So the midwife, Stanisława, kept her and raised Elżbieta as her own daughter. And here we have a photo of them from the 1960s. And in fact, it wasn't until Elżbieta was grown up and started asking questions that she even found out that her birth parents were Jewish. The little spoon that they included in the wooden box that was used to smuggle her out of the ghetto as a baby is the only memento she has of her parents, or one of the only mementos. She has referred to that little spoon as her birth certificate.
Wow. Elżbieta was among a lucky few who escaped the Warsaw Ghetto but were never reunited with their families because so many were killed. And in fact, a woman named Sharon, who's watching today, has written in Eva to say that her mother was one of the children rescued by Sendler and her network of rescuers. Another viewer named Danny is asking, do we know how many children that Irena rescued?
So it's a tough question. We can't know exactly how many children were rescued by Irena or even by her network, or how many she was involved in rescuing, but probably several hundred. The numbers really and estimates tend to vary.
I would imagine part of it is not only that their work was done secretly, but some of the people who were rescued might not have known of the connection
Absolutely.
to Irena.
Yes.
And yet she was doing this work for years under extreme danger. And a viewer named Chris is asking if she ever was caught.
So yes, she was caught. She was caught in late 1943 when German authorities learned about Irena from one of her from a member of her clandestine circle who had been arrested by the Gestapo. This person identified Irena by name while being interrogated and brutally tortured. The Germans ended up arresting Irena and locking her up in the Pawiak prison in Warsaw. This was a prison that was serving as a Gestapo prison during the war. And at the time that Irena was arrested, she was an integral part of an underground social welfare organization called the Council for Aid to Jews, codenamed Żegota. And beginning in January of 1943, she was head of the children's department and children's welfare section. And she knew the whereabouts of a number of at least several hundred, actually, Jewish children who had been smuggled out of the ghetto. The German authorities were aware of this network and its existence, but they really didn't know any of the details. And they interrogated Irena to get the information out of her. They tortured her, they broke her feet, they sentenced her to death, in fact. And through all of this, she refused to disclose any information about the activities of this group, about their members, or about the children and others that they had rescued.
And Eva, you mentioned that she had been sentenced to death. A viewer named Robert is asking, how did she escape this sentence?
Well, Irena was a really important member of Żegota, and so her colleagues bribed a Gestapo official with quite a bit of money. And instead of taking Irena to be executed, this man actually released her. And what happened after is that Irena had to go into hiding. She had to have a false identity. She even had to miss her own mother's funeral because she knew that German authorities would most likely appear or come to that funeral expecting Irena to be there. Even in hiding, though, Irena didn't stop any of her life-saving work. She was very committed and she continued to arrange for aid and rescue Jews until the end of the war in 1945.
We have a comment from Douglas. He writes in to say that Irena defined character, empathy, and decency. And how right you are, Douglas, absolutely. But because so much of her work was carried out in secret, Irena's story remained mostly buried even after the war. How long did it take for her rescue efforts to be more widely recognized?
So it took a couple of decades. Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, recognized Irena for saving Jews during the Holocaust in 1965. And while Irena's story was known in Poland to some extent, it really wasn't until after the fall of communism in 1989 that she became famous for her rescue work. We have to remember there wasn't much documentation about the activities that survived the war because of the underground nature of this work. People learned about Irena directly from the people she and her network saved.
I'd like to bring this a little closer to home for us, though, here in the US. Could you please tell us about a group of American teenagers who many years later came across Irena's story and wanted to shine a light on it?
Yes, so in 1999, a history teacher in Kansas shared an article with three of his high school students. This article mentioned Irena Sendler, and they were interested in learning about the Holocaust for a National History Day project. They were very moved by her story. They wanted to ensure that Irena's legacy would be preserved and recognized around the world. What they did is research as much as they could, gather the scant information that was available, and they wrote a play and performed this play, and they kept performing it long after completing their history project. After they found out that Irena was still alive in Warsaw, they corresponded with her, and with the help of a Polish university student who translated the letters. A little bit later, a Jewish man saw this play and was also very, very moved. And he raised the money, and he raised enough money to send these three students to Poland to meet Irena in person. And the students continued to write letters and visit Irena in Poland until she passed away in 2008.
What a beautiful personal connection, one that I can only assume felt very good for both Irena and for these students. We recently spoke with one of these students. Of course, now she's an adult. Megan Felt was only a freshman in high school when she first met Irena, and today she still helps educators and students share the stories of other unsung heroes. At the top of the program, it was her voice, Megan's voice, that we heard describing Irena as one of the most influential people in her life. Let's find out why Megan continues to share Irena Sendler's story with others.
As a high school student, I could have never imagined a high school history project, a research project, could impact and change my life the way it has, to inspire me to make a difference and stand up for what I believe in and know is right. And to have that opportunity to become a teacher and to collaborate with teachers and educators and to share these inspiring stories. As we share Irena's story and as we think about her actions, we ask those that we speak to, are you doing enough? Can you do more to make a positive change in the world around you?
It's really incredible to think that this play that a few high school students wrote more than 20 years ago, it has now been performed for hundreds of audiences in the US, Canada, and Poland. And in fact, a viewer named John has written in to let us know that he saw the play performed and what it meant to him. Irena has been honored in a number of other ways. Sue writes to let us know that her friend's son and his wife named their first daughter Irena in honor of Irena Sendler. Hearing all this and having studied her story the way that you have, Eva, what would you like our viewers to take away from the life and legacy of Irena Sendler?
Well, I think from our perspective today, Irena's story is unique and courageous, but she definitely did not see it that way. She leveraged what she knew how to do. She leveraged her skills, her organizational and networking abilities in spite of the dangers around her. And we have to remember she did this without cell phones, without social media, without the internet, without all of these extra tools that we have today. She did it by relying others, and these other people did it at great risk to themselves as well. And she also relied on people who would just turn a blind eye. So her story, to me, illustrates the power of human relationships that are not shaped by this like social, ethnic, or religious barriers or backgrounds, but really by a commitment to human values. And I think the last thing I'd like to say is that Irena is a very important symbol for rescuers of the Holocaust who responded with a lot of compassion and above all action, but may not be as well known today as Irena is.
Eva, your words are certainly resonating. Jan writes, she may not consider herself a hero, but we certainly do. Bless you for all the people who survived because of your bravery and the help of some very special people. Thank you, Eva, for sharing with us today, just kind of scratching the surface of the remarkable courage of Irena Sendler.
Thank you so much, Edna, for the opportunity.
A few more viewer comments. Kaiser wants us to know that it is important to remember and honor individuals like Irena Sendler, whose brave acts of resistance and compassion remind us of the importance of upholding the fundamental values of humanity, even in the most difficult times. And a viewer named Debbie adds, what an inspiring, courageous woman. Imagine what we could all accomplish if we emulated her, all of us together to help those in need, no matter the risk. Amazing woman. We would like to close today's program with humble words from that woman herself, from Irena Sendler, reflecting on what she did to save lives during the Holocaust. Thank you for joining us today.
Nie tylko, że nie było warto, ale mam wielkie uczucie, że się zrobiło za mało. Jak ze mnie robi się teraz bohaterkę, to mnie to bardzo denerwuje, bo to nie jest żadne bohaterstwo, to był obowiązek człowieka podawać rękę drugiemu człowiekowi i zrobiło się za mało, można było zrobić dużo, bardzo więcej.